Everyone, welcome to the Spiritual Awakening and Personal Power Journey. And I'm Melanie, and I wanted to ask you today, have you ever felt like you were stuck in Groundhog Day, going through the motions, feeling like joined to film feelings out of reach? Do you wonder why, even after therapy and self-help, the same patterns of anxiety and depression keep showing up? And what if the real shift that you've been looking for isn't just about fixing yourself, but about learning how to move forward differently in a way that works for you? So in a moment, I'm going to share some of my personal story and also podcast activism today that sort of activated some of the ideas that I've had around for a while, but I really sort of formulate a way that can help you think about the shifts and change that you want to make. So in a separate episode, I have recorded why 30 days, why 60 days, and why 90 days, and what some of the psychology is around that. But today I wanted to look at what the actual chemicals and states and psychology research that actually comes into a lot of this, so that you can understand how to capitalize on what you're already doing, what routines and practices you've already got in place that work well, and then how to build on it. So it's really about getting people to think about what their starting point is. So in terms of my own personal story, is I didn't come from a traditional academic background, quite the opposite really. I came from a working class background, mum was a single parent, and I've got 3 older brothers, and things were really difficult for my mum. But my school years as well were filled with disconnection, especially by the time I got to secondary school, except for music and geography, 2 subjects that I really got and drifted out. So I never thought that education would ever be a part of my life again when I left school, because I threw myself into the world of work and just got jobs to pay the bills, and the money that supported my love of travel, meeting new people, and parties. You know, this was the mid-80s when the house scene just really started to erupt, and music was a big thing in my life. Well, it always has been, but most certainly then. But so I got those jobs and started working away from about 18, and then things shifted when I got pregnant. I've been working in hotels and working doing split shifts, and anyone that's worked in hotels knows split shifts. You can get used to it, but it can be arduous, and we were doing 6 days a week. So it was a rhythm that I knew wasn't sustainable once I was going to have my first child. So that's when the moment of curiosity really kicked in, and I thought, what would it like to have a life that actually worked for me? And I didn't really know what that was, but the idea of, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have an office job 9 to 5? I could do that. So I did that for a couple of years, but deep down again, I sort of knew that that wasn't really going to be my career, and kind of liked purpose really. And I didn't know back then, but probably what I was searching for was purpose, not just work that sort of sustain me in the here and now. And that's what a lot of this, as I go into psychology research, shows us, is that sometimes our motivation starts off extrinsically, like getting a job, earning the money, success, getting the house, the car, those things. But sometimes it lacks something deeper. And that feeling for me kicked in around by the time I was had my second son. I think I was about 27 years age. And I started working for the Samaritans, and that was my turning point, because the supervisors at the time saw something in me and said, you've got, a gift for helping other people in emotional distress, and encouraged me to go and do therapy training. But because I sort of drifted out at school at 14, I was actually unsure of my own academic ability. But I found a course and focused on that process, and I agreed to it because it was only 6 weeks, and it wasn't academic in the way that I thought it was. It wasn't about learning and doing tests, it was experiential. But it gave you an experience of what that training would be like. And as I've said in other podcasts, I was kind of hooked straight away. I started to learn things that were so outside of the realm of anything I'd ever covered before, that piqued my interest and my curiosity even more. So that was perfect for the way that really I was good at learning. And that's why I ended up working in hotels and working as a chef, because I was more of a kinesthetic learner, which means I learned from watching and doing rather than through tests, memorizing lots of things. And doing it in that way. And in a way, that's probably why I sort of gave up on some of the lessons, because I just struggled more with the style of learning that they had at school. So that door was opened to, when I did that course, that 6 weeks, opened the door to me taking on a year training as a therapist. But we covered philosophy, psychology, and I just started reading loads, like world religion, and really starting to ask deeper questions about human suffering, meaning, and healing. And again, as I've said on other podcasts, I was really trying to I started to understand where I had had struggles and what might be the reason for that. And that's often why people go into therapy, is they get into adult years and they had a range of struggles and they're trying to work out where it came from so they could rectify that or heal from that. And I was learning a lot of my therapy training. And when you get into the diploma level of therapy, you go into personal therapy anyway. So you're going deeper and deeper and deeper all the time. So despite learning all the theory, despite discovering a lot, and despite being on a massive learning curve of really finding out the different reasons for human struggle and why we do what we do and where we can get stuck, I still found myself going in cycles of anxiety and depression. They weren't anything like what I'd had when I had depression for the first time after I had my first son, and then after my second son. It wasn't anywhere near as that, but I was still going in and out of these cycles of ways of being that I think now, looking back, slowed down my progress really and process. And that was about my own personal psychology, my own mindset, the things that got me stuck, my fears that were getting in the way of really examining those with other people due to different reasons, like growing in a family where secrets were key. We couldn't share a lot about our personal experiences just because of the nature of where we lived at the time. My mum got treated really quite harshly by neighbours, and so she didn't really trust a lot of people, and we were taught not to share basic aspects of our lives. And so that again can carry through into your adult years. But also something in me had also been awakened when I had my first son, or more so after my second son, because I thought, I keep feeling like this. I keep dipping into this malaise, into this melancholy, into this sort of state, depression and on and off anxiety. And the anxiety was often when I was doing something that was well outside my comfort zone, things that I'd done before. So I started to really get obsessed with, how do we start to feel better? How do we shift out of that? And initially, before I did my therapy training, I was looking at things like going to aerobics, learning about aromatherapy, getting a good sleep, looking at vitamins and nutrients. And so I was starting to examine what I could access, what was available to me at the time. That information that you just easily stumbled over. But then when I got into college, I was really starting to look at the kind of tools that help us understand who we are and more about what helps us get unstuck. And the basic premise is that when you train as a therapist, therapy is the thing that helps people grow, shift and change beyond their previous ideas of who they thought they were, and surpass the things that usually get them stuck or trapped in cycles or toxic patterns of behavior or relationships. So that led me to explore the sort of psychobiology of how trauma lives in the body, the chemicals in our body that are activated when we do and don't do certain things, psychopathology and behavioral cycles, like toxic relationships and that sort of darker side of psychology, spiritual questions and philosophy about the meaning of suffering, transcendence and purpose. But eventually I was really looking at the science of change, transformation, and then optimal performance. Because when you feel depressed, if you've had burnout, feel depressed, suffer with anxiety, I think it robs a lot of the life force that you do have. So you can find yourself tired a lot. You can feel really difficult to sort of go about the day-to-day things sometimes, let alone the conceiving of another idea, like doing a training, going to the gym, doing something on top. We don't realize how much that mindset, as well as the experiences that we've been in rob us of that life force. So this is really starting to look at kind of, well, what helps us get that? What helps us have more vitality, feel happier, and experience more well-being? And while I was looking at working at the local authority, I trained as a therapist and did a lot of therapeutic work, and then started running services. And while I was there, spent a lot of time working with the lead in public health, and they did a lot of research on behaviour change. And so I really started to get fascinated with, okay, if we're not satisfied with where we are, and we've kind of discovered what things have got in the way and what experiences we had that hampered us, that maybe part of why we get depressed or robbed of vitality or ended up with burnout, then what? What is it that helps us move forward? So in the local authorities and in public health, they're always looking to get value from money, what money they invest in different programs, and that's why they're so heavily researched. So that information isn't always mainstream. There's a lot more online now with podcasts and people talking about this. But it's not part of everyday language. And so sometimes it sounds a bit academic and quite removed from our everyday experiences. So I wanted to share some of my background. Like I said, I didn't grow up in a family where we were academic, we were working class, and just getting out, getting a job and paying for existence was usually the only focus. Going to university, bettering yourself, and even thinking about meaning and purpose came much later, and that's more of something that has become more mainstream in society in the last 2 decades. So I started trying different things out for myself. And so a lot of the things that I've learned and tried where I've had results from is what I've also ended up teaching. And the different models that I've learned in psychology, like NLP and hypnotherapy, state management, mindset work, guided visualization, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, Reiki, all of these different modalities have all supported me in my own evolvement. And that's why I'm quite passionate about teaching them, because, when you get benefits from something, often we want to tell other people about why that's a great thing. So I started trying out these different ways for myself and challenging old habits and pushing past comfort zones and facing fears. But for me, it's been I'd say sometimes a slow journey, but it's been a long journey of over 30 years. But I'd say there were certain time points where that speeded up, where I actively dived in deeper and started to make it more of a quest. Like the goal of focusing on how we reach our goals became something that I focused on more and more. And in particular, in the last 5 years, most definitely, because even though I surpassed any idea of what I might do, which wasn't that clear, apart from working in the hotels, I surpassed those ideas several times. Is each time I've got sort of further along and I've increased my sort of authority at work, got better jobs, been paid better. Sometimes things have come along and knocked me and either knocked me back or knocked me sideways. And that's the thing about life. Everybody, we move along and we'll have these external and internal things that can get in the way. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I really wanted to just understand what are the things that I could start to deploy so that I could start to move out of a way of being that was robbing me of vitality, partly my mindset of going into burnout, partly type A personality of, and they talk about it in some of the research, the type A personalities don't just push themselves a little bit out of the comfort zone, they push themselves a lot out of the comfort zone, and we over exercise, overdo, over offer, over give, run multiple projects. A lot of those people work in local authorities, they're what makes projects and programs get started and move forward and get results, because they want to help people, they're motivated to do that. So maybe you need to be thinking or have thought, is it possible to be truly happy, fulfilled, or even like yourself or your life again? And do you sabotage your progress or fall back into old moods or patterns? And I certainly have many times. And how do you actually rewire your brain and body for the life that you want? Like what's included in that? And we're overwhelmed by so many different types of information. So you're not alone, it's possible. And that's why I'm starting to weave more and more of my own personal journey in and out of this, because to some people I might sound incredibly academic and as though I've only sit in a therapy room. But my life's been much wider than that, and it's been very diverse. I've had a lot of diverse experiences of living with the rich and coming from working class background, of living in different cultures. I've been married into different culture, of working in lots of different arenas as well, local authorities, NHS England, voluntary sector services. I've worked across so many different facets and worked with hundreds of people and worked with hundreds of kids. And so the main theme of often people went to therapy because they were in crises, things that got to a point where they couldn't handle it anymore, was often what drove people to therapy. And now we're seeing a shift in that, which is great, whereas people want to understand themselves more and how can they tweak or change their life so they feel more satisfied and happier and healthier and have better well-being. So we've got more of a general understanding of the general things that help us. And today I want to blend that mix of psychology, neurobiology, what we know about the brain and what we know coming from research, and blending that through the lens of spirituality, of philosophy and psychology, because they do interweave at different intersections, and making it real and something that you can digest and take from this, something that will maybe inspire, give you some hope, or even give you a set of tools that you can start with. And sometimes we need some support to do that, to identify what that is and then put that in place, and then get some support while we carry that out. And that can be through coaching, therapy, or the group, if you sign up to a program. So also the psychology of behavior change isn't just about willpower. And the science says we also need to think about the nervous system and how we regulate that and calm it down so that we can learn new things, as well as not always get triggered into old cycles, old behaviors that trip us up, or patterns. And how chemicals like dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins, serotonin influence your mood, habit, and your relationships, and why flow states and novelty, such as what I've discovered over the last few years when I took up kayaking and paddleboarding, help reduce trauma systems and boost joy. And that was a connection I hadn't even made. A lot of the things I'd discovered through experience, and then I'd find the theory. When I was originally doing my training, I found the theory and then I linked that with experience. So you can do it either way, but each way is good, it's purposeful. And why flow states, such as novelty, does help us overall, especially when we understand how we get into flow state, which is usually the research around optimal performance, CEOs, athletes, people who are performing at the top of their game, but how we can use that information for us to start performing better than we previously had, and to maintain that and keep the results. And then understanding your own energy cycles and what keeps you stuck, and how you can finally start to build momentum. And then why purpose and connection creates natural motivation, and how this affects your brain chemistry. So this is also about examining those simple daily shifts from overwhelm to low mood to a more stable, hopeful state. Hence my 30-day change, grow and transform series. And this one is on your spiritual awakening and your personal power, your personal empowerment. And then growing your own self-trust and your own emotional reliance and resilience. So, like I said, I've lived through this. I've been to the bottom of many spirals. I've experienced PTSD, toxic relationships, burnout, and a feeling sometimes I've wanted to give up a few times, where I just felt like nothing was going to change, or I'd get so far and then something would knock me back. And like I said, I've worked with hundreds of clients, helping them move from stuck, stressed, shut down to empowered, resilient and creative, and even carving out new relationships that surpass relationships they've had before. And so my background, when I did that therapy training, combined initially therapy psychology and then general psychology and spiritual inquiry, trauma work, behavior science, NLP, yoga, mindfulness. I blend the sort of clinical approach when we look at mental health through the lens of the DSM, which is the Psychiatry Bible, which is the diagnostic way of looking at mental health, and the holistic approach is what was seen as alternative practices that now has a lot of research behind it. And I blend both approaches. I don't think there's one approach for everyone. There isn't one set route, but what we do know, there's a lot of things that can make a difference, even if you don't believe in it at first. So stay with me, because in this episode, I'll show you how you can start to understand what's keeping us stuck and how to move forward, work with our brains and bodies instead of against them, build confidence through practice, momentum, and self-awareness, and connect with purpose and create change that feels real, sustainable, and deeply aligned. So let's start with the basics. Sometimes we really do overcomplicate things, especially when it comes to change, healing, or creating a life that we're happy and content in. Sometimes we start to realize, and usually, and I was chatting to my neighbor today about, as we get older, we start to realize it's the very simple things that become really meaningful as we get older. And here's what I've found through the years: a clinical practice, deep personal healing, and integrating psychology and spirituality, is that we don't need to and can't fix everything at once. It's a process. We need to start by calming the nervous system, and that's what's come out a lot of the research in the last few years. When we look at Professor Vanderkolk, who looks at this through the eyes of research and on a much deeper level, because learning, motivation, connection, focus, and long-term change is easier to experience and implement when we've got a calmer nervous system. We know that about learning, that it's hard to learn and remember in states of stress, although high states of stress can mean that we can end up remembering those scenarios, because anything with a high state of emotion attached to it will be memories that will be easier to come into the fore, memories that we don't want as well as the ones that we do want. And it's also about going deeper into PTSD. And I'm not a specialist across neuropsychiatry and neurobiology, but I know enough about it to help people think about where they're at, what's meaningful to them, and what changes they can start to implement, and how to track those changes so that over time you can tweak those and get the best out of that, even if you've experienced trauma and PTSD. But for now, just know this, that when we've been through trauma or PTSD, our body can keep replaying it long after the event happened. And in other podcasts I've talked about, when I had my car accident in 2019, one thing that happened to me straight away is I experienced PTSD, and I was having nightmares and waking up gasping for air and thinking they were like death dreams. And I realized, when I started to get all these flashbacks of other traumatic experiences, it was like having trauma on a washing line, all these different pictures in my mind. And it was like, it was stressful, but also refreshing at the same time, because I knew through some practices like timeline work, guided visualization, some of the help from the therapist I had at the time, I could possibly clear them all in one go, because what it was showing me was they were all on the same washing line. They were all on the same timeline. And so the car accident sort of almost like lifted all of that back up into my awareness. And we're not always aware, because in order to survive and grow, we will often push these things outside of awareness, suppress them and push them down. And that's what we do with the shadow. But PTSD, of course, is a very powerful experience, because we can get triggered all the time with day-to-day things that can seem innocuous and not even connected to the thing that created it in the first place. And often these things are outside of our awareness, but I'll go deeper into that in another podcast. So basically, your brain is designed to protect you. And with PTSD and trauma, is your body stays on high alert. So kids that have grown up in violent backgrounds, for example, will have a much more sensitivity to the facial expressions and the emotions and the emotional climate than other kids. They'll be more sensitive to the shifts and change in energy, and so can become hyper vigilant. And that was one of the things that I used to talk to teachers about when I worked in schools, is
you've got a class of 30 kids and you're greeting them at the door when they come in of a Monday morning after being at home for the weekend. And teachers were misperceiving grunts, lack of eye contact, shrugged shoulders, or even kids who were shut down as rudeness and disrespect, when in fact that was the coping mechanism that the child was using after having a weekend and possibly living in a war zone, or just in a fractious state. They're being bullied at home. They've got a parent who's got mental health issue. People are screaming and shouting, and they've got no power and control in that situation. So we spent a lot of time educating teachers about what can be going on for kids and how to interpret their body language better than the way that they were doing, because the teachers would also be triggered, especially if the teachers had some trauma or difficult experiences. They had this feedback loop that was negative and could get very ingrained, especially if the teacher had not ever really done any work on self-awareness or trauma. So this leaves us to the first point, self-awareness. First of all, you have to know where you're at. You need to be able to figure out where you're at right now. How are you feeling? What feelings are you mostly in? And so on other podcasts, I've talked about doing sort of scoping your mood for like a week, gauging what emotions you're feeling on a regular occasion. If you're mostly in depression and anxiety, if you feel hopeless and helpless, and how much of the time do you feel like that? Or most of the time, are you feeling okay and you're satisfied in your job and you're slipping in and out of the occasional negative self-talk? So you might need some help from a coach or a therapist to help you learn how to gauge this and even just find out where you're at. Or if I said to you, no, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you in life? And if you said 2, 3, 4, or 5, okay, so there's possibly room for growth and room for change. So how satisfied are you? How happy are you? How fulfilled are you? How much meaning and purpose do you think you have? And you can look at those different aspects of your life through a lens, like using the well-being wheel, where you gauge that. And that's why I get people to gauge that and look at where they're at right now. So they can work out what their starting point is, because it's hard to measure. We can't measure against other people. Comparison isn't always useful. We need to measure against ourselves of where we're at right now. And that's what I've sort of consistently done over the years. So, like I said, I've been down that spiral many times. And what I would say is, when I had depression after the birth of my first son, I would say I would have gauged myself as miserable and depressed most of the time. But I do remember when I started to have days of respite where I'd feel a bit more normal, a bit better, a bit happier, a bit joyous, and then where I'd slip again. And I noticed over time the depression reduced and the satisfaction of things increased, but that also correlated with some of the things that I started to implement that did make a difference. And so it's worth doing that over time, so you can start to see, where do you grow and expand and feel better, and then where do you shrink and it feels like you're stepping back. So you can see, are you in this loop and cycle of going backwards and forwards, or are you staying stagnant and stuck? So this talk, what I'm giving now, is for those who are stagnant and stuck, as well as those who are making some headway, because the same thing applies. You just got to work out what your own starting point is. And then what do you want to feel instead? So take 30 seconds now to check in. What do you want to feel more of in the next 30, 60, or 90 days? So you might say, I want to feel more fulfilled, happier, healthier, want to feel more joy, more vitality. In the next 30 days. And often I just get people to think about 30 because it's easy to sign up for something for a month rather than signing up to something for 12 months, until you get such a momentum in those 30 days. Then it's easier to sign up for longer periods of time. And that can be a really useful framework to begin with. If you've done my 30-day videos before and you've pursued them, then you know that you can stick to something for 30 days. But initially, we're just getting you to be more aware, where are you at, and to try something for 30 days so that you can start to track what you're starting to notice. Helps you think more brightly, increase your joy and your happiness, and then where you slip. And sometimes that monitoring itself and responding to the journal questions is enough to do for the 30 days. And that's why the May and June versions that will also leave calling that level 1 just introduce you to 7-10 minute videos that are a light touch approach to some of the very key things that exist within this deeper body of work in psychology, philosophy, psychotherapy, spirituality. So that's your framework. And then have an understanding of brain chemistry and motivation systems. So when I worked in schools, when I started working in schools, I was working mostly with adults, and then I got asked to work in schools, and I was with mostly the year 6s and then the year 7s and 8s, because I did primary and secondary school in the UK. And one thing that I realized very quickly was the therapy training was great, but sometimes with the kids, you needed some prompts to help get them to open up and talk. Because often I'd have a teacher that would just bring Johnny in or Sally and go, oh, they've got some problems at home, they need to talk to you. And the poor kid's sitting there staring at you. Or if they've talked to many professionals before, they would just fold their arms and be resistant, like, you're not doing any more anger management training on me. So I kind of got used to how the kids would approach me. And really, it wasn't like they were expected to perform and talk to me. It was really about me helping them think about what is it they're already doing well and where are they getting stuck, and starting to teach them about the brain, how the brain works, how stress mechanisms work, and how stress mechanisms override the capacity to learn, for example. So they're not stupid or stuck, it's just they're getting stressed too much. So if they can understand how to lower their stress chemicals, then they can increase the feel-good chemicals by doing things that feel good, that they enjoy, and tone down on the negative self-talk and put in some new self-talk in there. So I did that as a sort of model, really, of working with every young kid that I came into contact with, because initially that is quite empowering when they realize that they've got some control over how they think, perceive the world, and some of the tools that they use. When they realize they can lower their stress, and that stress, in fact, is getting in the way. You can't study when you're always stressed. But we go deeper here. I wasn't really teaching the chemical side of things to kids that much until maybe they started getting into relationships, and we might start looking at things in terms of particular goals. Because initially with young people, you have to teach them about some of the basics first, and the same with some adults. So you learn the basic first, then you sort of work out where you're at and where you're stuck, and then you work out what might be the thing that you need to work on this week. And once you get a few results, that motivates you to try again and add something else on, and then your confidence grows and your courage grows. So, but in terms of the science of this, your brain runs on chemical messengers. And when we understand them, we can actually use them to help us move forward. So I'm going to give you some examples, and I'm going to give you the link to some podcasts that will help you go much deeper in this. If you're like me, you like the nerdy stuff and the science, and you want to understand it on a deeper level. But basically, we understand, people are talking a lot about dopamine lately, and this is your go get it chemical. So it's like speed for the brain. It's actually correlated with speed, the drug, and it gives you drive, motivation, and focus, helps you lock in focus. But here's the problem. For example, if you constantly check your phone every time you get a message and you pick it up straight away, you get the hit of dopamine. But if you want to get into flow state and you're working on writing a report, writing a novel, doing a project, and you're getting in that flow state where you're really focused and you've got attention, which is one of the problems that people with ADHD and ADD can have, is struggle to get into that attention. When you look at your message, it can actually take about 10 to 15 minutes to get focused again on what you're doing. So that's why a lot of the research on success says, when you get up in the morning, don't look at your phone, don't look at your emails, do your yoga, do your mindfulness, go for a run, do the things first, then look at the sheet of the things you need to get done today. Then do the first few things that you need to get done that morning, and then you open your emails. A lot of people open their emails straight away, and then you've had a conversation with 30 people in your head from all those 30 emails that you had. So dopamine is the go-to chemical. So I've been looking at how my clients can use dopamine to get the effect that they want and how they use it in a more positive way. So rather than scrolling on the phone at particular times of the day to avoid that, it's not like you can't scroll on your phone. I scroll on my phone more than I used to. But I don't do it in the daytime when I want to be focused on my projects because I know it'll just really slow me down and I won't have the mental energy or capacity to focus on what actually is important that day. So that scrolling on the phone might feel like a short-term pleasure, but actually we are burning up the dopamine on things that don't necessarily take us to the rewards or the bigger goals. And because part of changing and growing is about stacking those experiences and the brain creating new neural pathways, and we need to gather momentum to do that, and I'll go more into that in a moment. Then we've got oxytocin. This is the connection chemical. So let's put this akin to dating. You meet someone online, you start chatting to them and you think, oh, he's great, she's great, and the dopamines get fired, short-term pleasure, you're messaging each other. That moves to maybe the first date and carrying on messaging each other. Dates start to go well, connection goes well, you spend more time together. Oxytocin starts to get released because oxytocin is the connection chemical. It's designed so that, you know, when humans are ready to procreate, they've already created that chemical between them. They've already bonded. It's the bonding chemical. And that's akin to heroin. It's how calming and bonding it can feel. The only problem with this is oxytocin is released when we feel close to others, when we get a hug, eye contact, pro-social activity, and that increases purpose and connection. But if you go on those early dates and you meet someone who's toxic, but you don't realize it, and you build up that connection too quickly, then that connection can get too strong, and then it's harder to release yourself from that person because your dopamine's turned into oxytocin, and it's harder to move out of a situation where you're getting those real floods of pleasure chemicals, which are what is activated sometimes on purpose by characters who really want you to serve them a purpose, like in narcissistic relationships, for example. And that's another whole different angle. But I wanted to give you some understanding. Most relationships at some point will start to release that oxytocin where you feel calm and committed and connected and you like spending time with them and it feels really good and you're on the same page. Then we've got endorphins that are increased when we do things like exercise. Natural painkillers released through laughter, exercise, and risk taking. And then anandamide. That's the bliss molecule. I haven't come across that so much, actually. It increases feelings of peace and flow. Now, I've actually felt bliss and peace and flow through mindfulness, meditation, gardening, Kundalini yoga. And as we get more into this, I've been able to tap into that more frequently and more easily, probably because I started the journey through yoga. Then I practiced meditation. Then I learned how to do mindfulness, and then how these things become my everyday activity and how I built up that momentum without realizing it so that I could experience that more and more and more. And the more you experience that, the more you're building up that momentum, that chemistry in the body, you're closing down the old neural pathways and you're opening up new ones. And then we've got serotonin, which helps regulate mood, confidence, and sense of safety. So serotonin, of course, often used in antidepressant medication. So it's really important that you realize that you are already producing these chemicals. Is it the same for everybody? I don't know. I've had different research point to things like mental health is related to chemistry. It isn't. It's way deeper than that because we can improve our mental health through exercise, through nutrition, through mindset work, or through the way that I've done it. You know, I've had to purposely focus on improving my mental health and my physical health and then my spiritual health. So then what that means is if we're in a state now that doesn't feel good and we're not happy and we want to improve things, we have to be prepared to move out of our comfort zone. And I don't realize, but I'm a Taurus. We get a lot of gratification out of comfort and the nice things in life. And so we can really love doing that. And like a lot of people during COVID, you know, I liked being at home and I liked the simple and the comfort, but we can get too comfortable there and forget that we need to expand and go back out. And lots of people on the spiritual journey were saying they don't want to be with people, and they find that that was interfering with things. And sometimes we've got to ask, is this an avoidance mechanism that we're deploying when really we need to get out and stretch? So I think I've gone through bursts of stretch and moving out of my comfort zone over the years, and some of them have been really challenging and some have been more gentle. So my recent activity that's led to me doing this 30-day program, for example, started when I consciously decided in late 2022 that I couldn't stay doing the jobs that I was doing. They weren't satisfying me on a deep level anymore. My heart wasn't in them. I didn't know what to do. So it all started with making one decision, which is I'm going to try something. And I'll share more later what that was when I started trying it. So learning happens though when we're in a space of safety and stretch. So there is a learning theory around this, and I used to apply this again going back to schools and young people. Is young people only really start to learn when and move out of their comfort zone when they feel safe. But if they're coming from war zones and issues at home, teachers have to create a sense of safety in a way. And we did this a lot through circle time work and group work. You have to create that sense of safety and trust so that they can trust that you're not going to humiliate or shame them or make them feel worse when they step out of their comfort zone. So you create that sense of safety, same as when you go to yoga. Before you're able to really relax and get into the yoga, you've got to feel that the environment, the teacher, you trust them and it's safe. So we create that sense of safety, and learning happens then when we start to stretch. But if we push too hard, we can trigger the anxiety and shut down. And so when I've done that in the past, done something that's pushed me right outside the comfort zone, my anxiety has been massively triggered. And I was in the pattern of, I was very shy as a child. And literally used to hide behind mum when she was talking to the neighbours and they try and talk to me. And I was one of those kids that was like, oh, don't talk to me. So I was incredibly shy, and then I got to my teenage years, made friends, but I took risks. But I think before I got to my teenage years, my mum was trying to socialize me, and she would push me into doing things that I didn't enjoy. I was too stressed to relax, to enjoy them, and we went on trips. I went on a holiday once with something like with the brownies, hated every minute of it. Went on trips, hated the trips. So in a way, whereas I was happy on my bike, happy with my friends, exploring. So my mum recognised things, but I didn't quite tune into that I wasn't ready to do some of those things. And slowly, I got better and better. And certainly when I went to college, that pushed me right outside my comfort zone, because the very first time I had to record a session that I did with a client when we were practicing our skills and then send that to the teacher to listen to and write an essay on it created so much massive anxiety. But slowly, when you start learning, is you realize that your teacher isn't judging you. They're just doing a critique of your work to help you grow and expand. And I started to see that quite quickly, because her comments on my essay work was invaluable, and I took every comment into account so that I could improve my written work, my essay work, and also my practice. And so I was able to take that critique of what I was doing, because there was just something about the tutors that meant I was able to do that, unlike when I was at school, where they could just get annoyed with you and just make your life misery if you upset some of the teachers. So thankfully we only had a couple like that. But as a kid, if you've been used to hiding away and being shy and find it difficult to take risks, and the idea of learning and going to college now as an adult scare you to death, is because often that's come from our previous experiences. But adult education is very different as well to education like going to school. So what they say is as well is we need to get to the sweet spot, edge work. But like I said, if you've got personality like a type A personality that I became, um, where I would work and work and work and push myself really hard and work really hard and go to the gym really hard. And I've pushed myself on so many levels that that's why I've ended up with burnout, because I didn't always have the energy. I wasn't putting in the things into my body that would help support me through that, even basic things like not having enough protein and nutrition to cope with the amount of challenge that I was putting my body through when I was working out hard in the gym. Not getting enough sleep, because when you get stressed, you sleep less, and then having too much responsibility and not enough support. They were all like a cocktail towards, if I said, what's the recipe for burnout? I could tell you what the recipe for mine was. So it was partly psychology, partly mindset, partly the way that I approach life, and partly also because I did enjoy learning the things that I learned. I did enjoy the challenges. And so you can start to get a dopamine hit from the new challenges, of always having something new focus. And I think that has probably been a key theme throughout my career in the last 30 years is I like learning new things. I like getting inspired, listening to podcasts. I listen to thousands of hours. But it's also about tempering that and realizing when you're tired that you need to rest, you need to turn off, you need to switch off, and you need to just go inside and appreciate beingness, mindfulness, and meditation. So it's a real balance. So we're talking about the edge. If this is where you're at right now, your day-to-day life is sometimes just coming out of your comfort zone, might be joining a social group, signing up to a 6-week course, traveling a bit further than you normally do. If you drive, I've got a couple of friends who are happy driving in an area that they're really familiar with, but get quite stressed going too far out of that comfort zone. So they slowly are widening that perimeter. And it's the same with dating, if you meet people online or face to face, each time, it's a potential for growth and for you to learn about yourself. So we have to nudge ourselves outside of that. And the word nudge is used a lot in behavioral psychology, and the government use it a lot because if they want to change behavior long term, they actually use nudge theory, and you can actually look that up. But we're talking about this personal desire of what we want to be in control of in terms of our life and change. So here's the thing. There are lots of blocks that get in the way of our ability to start, such as internal self-talk. I can't do it. If I think about what mine was like when when it was suggested that I go to college to train as a therapist, I can't do that. I can't study, can't write essays. There was all that sort of negative self-talk. But when I found out you didn't have to write essays, not in the first year, we didn't do any of that. And the first 6 weeks was just having the experience of it, which was pushing me outside my comfort zone already, but it was feasible. And then a lot of people have a fear of failure or a fear of success or past experiences that have been imbued with drama, or they're in relationships. If everybody, has ever come into contact with the film Educating Rita, where all she wanted to do, she was a housewife, bored senseless, and all she wanted to do was go to college. Or Shirley Valentine just wanted to experience the world, and their partners were like, "Why do you want to do that? What's that about?" And so wanting something more than what you had was often seen as strange or weird, especially when we were growing up. I remember hearing that sort of talk and those messages. So thinking that something's always bad around the corner or the shoe will drop. That's why sometimes we do low risk to start with. Some people can go straight into high risk and some need little steps. But these can all create internal resistance, and we can feel resistance at different phases of our life. But learning what momentum is and how to build it up will help you start moving. And like I said in the video, why 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days is that helps us build up momentum. Every time we opt for sticking with a plan of watching a video, writing in our journal, putting some time aside, we can start to celebrate those shifts and what we've done. And that also builds up courage, confidence, and momentum. And then we start to see the real results of where that has made an impact in our life. So that is then much easier to get through resistance. So like I said in previous videos, I went back to the gym in October last year. And initially it was a real push, but I decided, right, this is my focus. I locked my focus in. This is my focus. I'm going to the gym and I'm going to go swimming. Nothing's going to get in the way of that. I had my work and I was doing this in and out of when I was traveling. Nothing's going to get in the way of that. I want to get fitter, stronger, more endurance, breathe better. And so I started doing that. But initially it was a real push and I was tired. And I knew that I would be tired. I knew it would affect me mentally because exercise does. And so I gave myself a few weeks leeway on that without putting too many other demands in place. And then I started to get the results, started to feel the buzz of feeling stronger, feeling better, then cheering myself on of, yeah, I got there. That was great. I did it. And then after a month, yes, I've beat my 30 days, my own personal best. I'm carrying on. And now I'm starting to feel the joy and the bliss of swimming, especially when it's quiet. So you get these phases of experiences, and unless you try, you won't know what is going to unfold as a result. You can always change your mind after 30 days and go, okay, give that a go, give that a go. It's all right. But too many people give up too quick. I'll give that a go, don't work, don't make any difference. Well, sometimes it takes a bit longer for things to make a difference, especially if we've spent, let's say on average, even if we're 21 now, 20 years in one mindset, growing up with a family, in stress, in drama, and then all of a sudden expecting ourselves just to feel instant joy or bliss, which you can get, you know, some people get from these trips that they take or certain yoga sessions or whatever, but is it sustainable long term? Not really, not unless you are applying yourself anyway. So sometimes also we have to start from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation. Now, I talked about motivation on one of my other videos saying don't wait for it. But what I mean by this is initially when I left home, my motivation was extrinsic. It was I wanted a particular job that gave me a particular lifestyle. So working by the sea in a hotel that paid me a certain amount of money, high-end tips, so that I could go out, socialize, spend time with friends and meet new people all the time. So that was my motivation. And it was easy because once I'd done it a few times, it was really easy to find a job working away and it was easy to make new friends. I'd done it. The first time I did it, it was a bit stressful, but I got over that. So things like money, recognition or job status can make a difference. And the better I got in those jobs, I was working with head chefs and they would teach me things, you know, how to cook different things. So I was constantly being challenged and constantly winning at those challenges. And so that just really generated my confidence. So I could go and work anywhere really. So if it's in a big hotel, I'd go as a commie or a chef de partie. If I was in a small hotel, I could be like the head cook. You know, it really depended. But I just enjoyed being able to have those new experiences. So I kind of lived a life of novelty. We need novelty, you see, which is dopamine. We need the novelty. We need the risk taking. So I did that without realizing it, and that was what started to change my life. So it was intrinsic. That's what I was aiming for at the time. But when I had my son, that was when the question of that isn't going to be enough, because now the circumstances of staying at home with a baby or going to work, I can't just work for the money anymore, because for a lot of women, you're leaving your child at home. You want what you're going for has to, in a way, feel more, that it gives you more to counterfact the issue of you might want to stay at home with the child. And you have that conflict between you being the mum for the next 4 years till they go to school full time, or you're doing it part time, or what has the job got now? So, and in a way, that's what I was looking at. But my next motivation was working 9 to 5 in an office, novelty, new experience, and challenge, because I'd never worked in an office and never used a fax. I know it all sounds simple now, but at that time it was really daunting to use a fax machine, talk to people on the phone, I worked in, I was tracing parcels, basically parcels that went lost in courier companies and around the world. And so it was quite exciting. And at the same time, people complained a lot because lots of parcels went missing, and we couldn't find them in customs, or we didn't know if they got delivered, because this was well before anything was digitized. So I had novelty, there was stress, but I would manage that really well. And I did that for a few years. So then we moved to what's called intrinsic. So now I was moving into, okay, I'd done the office job. That was a challenge. That was dopamine hits. I was getting some satisfaction out of that. Then when I had my second child, it was okay, something's going deeper now. I want to do something, and I can't even remember what was in my mind. So it was in phases, and sometimes our life moves us in phases. And it was when I started doing the voluntary work, which really opened my eyes up, because I'd always been geared towards doing social work kind of things. One of my essays at school was about alcoholism. I was only 15, and I was writing about alcoholism. My dad was an alcoholic, and I was asking some very basic questions that I couldn't understand at the time about what is an alcoholic and what do they look like beyond our generalizations. And so I had a propensity, probably at that time, but I didn't realize it, towards, that kind of social worker, carer, therapy role anyway. So now I'm thinking, but I need something that's more meaningful, that gives me some kind of meaning or purpose, and started doing the voluntary work. And sometimes, again, we're just following that nudge, we're following that curiosity. So curiosity is key, that we get a bit curiosity of, I wonder what it'd be like to do that. That looks interesting. And that was enough to get me to go and research the course. Then I needed a little bit of courage and had to move out of my safety zone a little bit. But because it was only 6 weeks, I wasn't signing up to anything big. And that's the key thing now. We're looking at dopamine, the first dopamine hit, novelty, risk taking, curiosity, a desire to try something out, not get knocked by anyone else's opinions, just do it anyway. And start with something that's a small sign up, 30 days, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, because within that time, so much can happen, and it really can. So then what we know in the last 5 years is, or even maybe a bit longer, is that people are gearing more towards purpose. They're not just working now for having money. The extrinsic motivation of job, success, and career, it can happen, but people tend to only do that for a certain time frame before they start looking at, okay, I want something more meaningful. I want to enjoy my relationships, because it's hard to have a job where you're climbing up the ladder and successful relationships and have children and everything else, because it's a lot to manage. And some people do it, but there's so many skills involved in that, and you've got to be at the top of your game all the time. And sometimes you can only sustain that lifestyle for a certain amount of time before something shifts. And like I said, it's different for everyone. So this is, how do you boost the feel-good chemicals to get you motivated? And this is what we're looking at. So this is about connecting with your why. So whether that is you like helping people, around pregnancy and infertility, for example, I did a speaking event last week, and I was interviewing a lady that has been helping Sarah Jane Thomas, women going through the journey of IVF and trying to get pregnant, and sharing her journey of what that was like, but also helping them navigate the system. So this is about also how she turned her pain into personal empowerment and into her own business, or advocating for elders. So I've got another friend who works in NHS England, and she had an elderly father, but she was also working on the elderly pathway and looking at what is it that the families need to know about how you support your aging parent, and how you look at documents and how you look at care and support and things like that, so that they could navigate that better without the level of stress that is often involved. So it depends on, purpose is often linked to making a difference outside, so whether that is saving cereal boxes and turning them into something, or old tires and turning them into something, it usually starts with something like that where you want to make a difference. And I think when I was at the Samaritans, I realized how many people were miserable, suicidal, on the edge. and had experiences that at that time were mind-blowing. You know, I hadn't come into contact with the depth of, I knew about alcoholism and drug addiction and abuse, sexual, physical, domestic abuse, emotional abuse. I knew about families where people had been in prison, had mental health issues. You know, that was part of the society I grew up in, but I think I was protected from it to a degree, really, in my own home setting. But then when I worked at Samaritans and I'm listening to those stories direct, and I really started to think about how miserable people were. And then when I started doing my training and reading a little bit about Freud, whose idea was about, you know, misery and melancholy and depression, and how that's been such a big part of many people's lives over the centuries. How do we help people feel better? You don't want someone to attempt suicide. You know, you don't want them to do that. You don't want them to get them to that place. And I was always quite passionate when I worked in NHS England. I worked on the national, I think it was the anti-suicide pathway. Basically, they were trying to put all these services in place, and in particular for a lot of men as well, because we didn't have services for men at the time, where they could put the right things in place so that people, even if they got to that point, they could be sort of nudged off that trajectory, because once your mind gets locked into something, it can be hard to let that thought go. And so it was about raising awareness and helping people realize that if you're stuck, stagnant, where it feels hopeless and there's meaninglessness, that's a horrible place to be in. And so I was really keen to learn what I could about that, but also how I shifted my states that were coming in and out like tidal waves sometimes, and other times I was free of it. You know, slowly through my training, I got better and better at managing and taking control of what was going on. So let's talk practical tools. They're the chemicals involved in starting to look at how you change, grow, and transform, or even how you turn your life around and become more. And it's hard to say what your goal is, but do you want to become more satisfied, happier, healthier, more well-being, more resourceful, more fruitful, abundant, you know, and more? You've got to kind of figure out in that first part of where are you at right now? What's your general state? What challenges do you keep facing, and what things are going well? And then what do you want to improve? And sometimes you have to focus on one thing, not all of it. So say it's health, you can focus on health, or you can focus on the relationship with your kids or your partner, or you can look at changing how you work or the work that you do or the hours that you work. So it's examining that first. Where are you at right now? And also, what are you curious about, and where do you feel a nudge towards? And it's the curiosity, you know, that little thought that you have in the back of your mind. So first of all, you do that audit, self-audit and life audit. And then you'd like, where's that nudge? And through practicing mindfulness and meditation, or just having time out to yourself, sometimes that noise, that nudge gets a bit louder. It says, hey, you know, that course you've wanted to do, it's still there, they're advertising it. That pottery course. Yeah, you know, it's a little whisper in your mind, or your friend might say, do you know what? I saw that course. Why don't you go and do it? The photography, or they're hiring people and they're going to train you to be a travel consultant. And so it can come from other people, it can come from you. And then you've got to stop the doubts. That internal dialogue says, why are you doing that? You can't do that. You're rubbish at that, whatever that. And so ignore that. Go with the nudge and the curiosity, because that's your body and your soul saying, here's this next step forward. Give it a go. So then it's about building that system that supports you. You've done your life audit. You listen to the nudges, write them down if you forget them. Then start going on Google and researching. Do a little course on Udemy. You know, they've got short courses on pretty much everything. If you want to do practical courses related to work, look on Google courses. If you want to increase your skills in AI or Microsoft or Word or any of those things, there are courses that you can do. But the thing about going to college or uni is you're meeting other people and you're having conversations and you're sharing ideas. And that's what I enjoyed about college, because that's where a lot of growth happens as well. So first of all, as well, you have to prepare your brain and body for success, that you're going to do it. So you've done your life audit, you're listening to the nudge, you're writing things down. You might even try my course, 30 days to whatever the course is, the July one or the May and June one. Regardless, just sign up for anything that's 30 days, give it a go and see what happens. And that's why I put the journal prompts in there, so you can deepen your knowledge and understanding, and even find books that relate to some. Because when you get, oh wow, you know, if I'm talking about the multiple selves, the book that I read by Rowan, who talked about the selves and how to capitalize on all these different aspects and the energy that all these different aspects have. And you listen to me talking about that, and you might feel guided to go and buy that book, and you learn about all your aspects of yourself, and you stop condemning some of them and put them in the shadow and say, I'm not looking at them. Instead, you look at them and say, what resources do they contain and how can I use them? Now you're empowering yourself with the resources that are already sitting within you. But you need to prepare your brain and body for focus. So that's about knowing the best time of the day for doing different tasks. So that's looking at your own energy cycles. For example, if you wake up early in the morning, do you perform best in the morning? If so, that's when you crack on and do all your work and maybe exercise in the morning, and then crack on with your work before you look at your emails. And then if you're like me, that anything past 1 o'clock, when my brain used to slow down completely and I couldn't talk and read reports or anything, but 8 o'clock at night onwards, I could read a really dense document or research paper. So get to know how you work. And if you've got the flexibility, as I have talked to with some of my clients who work for traditional organizations, they've worked out that they can work as long as they work their hours. Some mornings they'll go for a walk, go to the cafe and then work. Other days they'll start really early and finish early and then go to a cafe, go to a class. So they start looking at how they can use those hours. And when I worked for an international courier company, I used to deal with the Americas. So I could work later in the afternoon and start work late. And then when I worked with other parts of the world, I could start work early. And so you get to know what times of the day work best, and it doesn't stay the same forever, but it's just knowing what works right now. Creating a schedule that supports rather than drains you. I do a whole workshop actually on how you create a plan that works for you, because we have to look at those different components and include every bit of time that you spend on things: housework, work, driving the kids to school, courses, therapy. All of those different facets have to be taken into account because they are all different parts of your life. And then creating a schedule with 1 or 2 additional things that build in the mechanisms to change. And then using tools like mindfulness, gratitude, breathwork, visualization, journaling, novelty to rewire the habits. So that's what my 30-day program is about. So we're building the foundation towards flow, moving out of survival into thriving. So we have struggle and survival, then we have wrapping our head around it, and then we move into thriving. So the wrapping our head around it and trying things is where we start to get little results, little dopamine hits. But we get the dopamine hits not through just scrolling at the phone and reading the message. We get the dopamine hit because that task that we had that day to do, we can tick off and go, oh, I achieved that again. I went for my swim, I went for my 10-minute walk, and made that new recipe, whatever that is, that becomes our dopamine kick. So flow is more linked to optimal states. And when we're in flow, I've talked to clients about this, it feels like time slows down and expands, and you get so much more done in that time. And you're not in a state of stress. You just kind of know it works. And if you haven't experienced it, or you might have experienced in other settings, like when you're gardening, where you just listen to a piece of music, you zone out and become aware of time and space. And flow's very healing. So you're not in the stress state, you're in the flow state. And one of the bits of research that I read about recently that indicates how these methods can really help even with trauma and PTSD, whereas years ago we used to almost write people off with those conditions if they were identified, is there was a piece of research called the Pendleton program, where they had soldiers who were doing a mix of talk therapy and surfing, and they showed significant improvements in their PTS symptoms. And the reason was the surfing forced focus, attention, and novelty. So you imagine it, and I experienced this last year. Well, the first time I experienced it, 2016, when I took redundancy. I got some kayaking lessons. And initially, I just wanted to get out on the boat with the instructor and other people. And then he said, "Oh, why don't you do the course?" I didn't realize what the course involved anyway. I did the course. But the moment I first got in the boat, and of course, this has been harder since my car accident because it affected my brain's capacity to measure time and space in certain situations. So I got in the kayak and I'm on the water and I can feel the boat move and my brain goes into total overwhelm. But I told him about it. I knew that that was going to happen. And I said, "Look, I have this stress response. I can't control it." But I was prepared to get in the boat and override it because he was a really good instructor. I trusted him, going back to that state of creating trust and security. So I got in the kayak and it took, for me, it felt like a lifetime, but probably only a few minutes. And then I started to feel that orientation. And that's what happens when we go into stressful periods. You see, we go into this, we have reorientation mode, stress, chemicals are released, and then orientation. And so I started paddling slowly and listening to the instruction, but it was really difficult for my brain to take on the instruction, work it out, and then apply it. And it was really interesting just having that as an experience, because at first it took me back to when I was a kid at school where I felt completely stupid because I couldn't get something. So the maths teacher would be talking, I would be seeing his lips move, but I was in a heightened state of stress and it got worse every time. By this time, I just can't understand any lesson. Inside, I'm like, why can't I get it? I must be stupid. Everyone else is right and they can get it. So that internal dialogue was set off. So when I did the kayaking lesson, same thing was activated. And I've had it activated before when I was learning about NLP. And this is how we move from learning state of safety and security to risk. So I was taking a risk now, novelty and risk, dopamine, but dopamine in overwhelm. So I'm paddling. Anyway, he was really patient. We were taking our time and slowly, slowly. And my whole body, I must have been in freeze mode because I was growing like this, My whole body is stiff almost, which is not the way to do it. It's not, like when you swim and you can't swim like you're a cardboard cutout. And I slowly got to get it. But even every time I went back in the boat to do the lessons, I was still experiencing that. But because I'd already gone through the experience several times, I now trusted myself that I could get through it and I'd be able to enjoy the flow of floating on the river. And it was beautiful. When the sun was shining, we went down these little crevices on the river that normally no one sees because you can't see it from the road or if you're walking. And so my brain was getting orientated with that. So I've applied that learning when I've done other things, but I had exactly the same experience when I did paddle boarding last year. I was at a festival and they had paddle boards that you could just use, but I just knew I wasn't going to be able to just get on a paddle board. So I booked a lesson and the same thing happened. And I didn't explain to this teacher because I thought I'd got past most of the way my brain kicks into the sort of PTSD. And anyway, she was teaching us how to very slowly, like we were 9-year-olds, which was great for me, to sit on the paddleboard, how to hold the oar, I think it was, how to move on the water, and then how to get up on the board. And she'd use phrases like, "It's just like when you do yoga, you just get up." No, it's not. It might be the same principle. So for ages, I just avoided even getting up. I thought, no, I'm going to stay kneeling down. And it's quite good to paddle when you're kneeling down on the board. And then eventually I managed to get up. Same experience. I was holding my body really stiff when I was trying to manage it. But then when I started to relax and enjoy the experience, then I started to feel the other chemicals coursing from my body of just sheer utter enjoyment and joy. That combined with they were playing music on the lake and I just had this music coming through the airwaves and floating on the water, and it was a sunny day, and it was like all of that mixture that just created that flow, that just really good feeling. And so often that's what we seek in, but we have to go through the pain threshold to experience that. So initially, when you're doing say like a 30-day program, you're listening to me, and if I don't understand what she's saying, this is too deep, blah, blah, blah. But if you just trust yourself, just follow what you can follow. As long it's about the consistency and routine of doing it every day that's creating the difference, not necessarily the content. But I talk about different facets in the content that are related to positive psychology and research, because we know that that helps. So that's kind of why I cover those topics. But I wanted to share my personal experiences with you, because even though I've been a therapist for over 25 years, I've had to battle on and off, not so much these days, but with that depression that used to come in and out, and with deep grief and loss, and with the deeper spiritual healing that goes on when when you're going through a massive stage of spiritual awakening. And I didn't realize it was that, but awakening really is where you really start to live your soul-led life, rather than the life that's based on conditioner or who you think you are. And even though I knew I wasn't necessarily my conditioning or who I thought I was, I didn't really know, didn't really have a direction of travel. And so it was really about continuing to trust that process. So those soldiers started to be able to improve the symptoms of their PTSD because they were doing the surfing and locking in their attention and novelty, dopamine, the endorphins that are released when you do that, it feels good. And then they were also having the talk therapy, and that was the approach I was taking without realizing when I was doing it. So now I'll let you know how I get on, because I'm going to a festival in a few weeks, and we will be doing the paddle boarding again. So then you have to learn what works for you. So you need to track what helps and what hinders you. So for example, you do the 30-day program, you listen to a video a day, but also you've got everyday life. So you might start to realize that you are reducing the amount of time and effort you put into things that you don't enjoy, or not spending time with people that you enjoy in the past, and now you don't, and you're putting more time into the things that feel good. And that can be more rest, chilling out more, going to a new class, spending more time with the kids. It can be anything. So it's about noticing when you start to feel good, what was happening when you were feeling good? What were the components? Who were you with? What were you doing? Were you on your own? Were you listening to music? And then when you stop feeling good, what throws you out of flow? Is it the text? Is it drama? Is it other people? Is it other people's expectations? Negative self-talk, or the conversations that we play out, the arguments we play out in our heads. And then log, when do you feel most satisfied? And then what makes you lose that momentum? So noticing that when you start to make a decision, when you've made a decision that you're just going to maybe try one simple thing every day, is you starting to map it out and notice patterns. And that's where you start to be able to get more control and feel more confident, is you're noticing patterns. And when you notice and your awareness grows, you can't unlearn what you've learned. You're now taking ownership. And when you slip and you miss a day, or you don't go to the gym or don't go swimming, you know what it's like, is you say, oh no, I've missed that. And some people just stop completely because they think they've failed. No, you just reset. You reset and you go, okay, I'm going to reset. I'm going to start it today. I fell off track. What made me fall off track? And rather than having to go at yourself and feeling really guilty, or just thinking, right, that's it, is to notice that that's happened and that's normal. And then we start to look at like addiction theory, that you come off the drugs, so you stop doing the things that used to give you the hits, that aren't purposeful anymore and aren't working for you, and you start looking at the things that are making you feel better. So you need to change your focus. You're still getting the same dopamine and serotonin and endorphins and oxytocin releases, but you're getting them through the new things. So we have to experience the new things and bring them into our life to be able to gently release the ones that aren't working. So that's kind of like addiction theory. And we'll all relapse, we'll all do really well, but then we'll have that cake, or forget to go to the gym, or forget something, or something else will happen that makes us sit up and say, I really need to make sure this happens now. And we'll stop selling ourselves short and put ourselves first more and more. So we'll notice those patterns, build more control, and control is one of the most important pieces, because when I was exploring, one of the factors that improve life when you've experienced depression is having more control. and not control the things you can't control, but control yourself, who you talk to, where you go, the choices that you make. And that can really help in depression. So that's when you have some say in how you feel, how you respond, and how you shape your day. So before we close this part one, this process isn't about being perfect. It's just a process. It's about becoming aware of where you're at, what you want, what your brain needs, how your body responds, and what tools help you stay on track. So on my program, you can look at every time you do one of the videos, you can have a look at which one stood out more and what is helping you stay on track, so that you are becoming more aligned. And even though it's imperfect, which is fine, you're still taking steps. And then even if you've just had 1 or 2 days where you think, oh, I felt better for longer, or wow, that was better than imagined, and you start to shift your expectations, we're actually creating new neural pathways in the body, and we're starting to trust that better is possible. So if there's something I want to leave you with, okay, is that you have more influence over how you feel, what you experience, and the direction of your life than you have been led to believe. Change doesn't always happen overnight, but it does happen like that. Change can happen. And the beautiful thing is, the more that you understand how your brain and body works, the more equipped you are to create those small shifts that lead to lasting transformation. So this talk is a little bit more denser and deeper than usual, but I wanted to share some of the brain chemistry ideas with you so you can see how you can tap into that and create your own chemistry, your own psychochemistry. Your lab is, where do you get your dopamine hits? Where do you get your endorphin and your and your serotonin? How are you going to do that? Because you can get chemistry hits through food. I think it's bananas that release, I think it's serotonin. So different foods also activate those processes in the body. But it starts with awareness, intention, focus, and realizing what supports you having focus and what robs your focus, and the willingness to show up for yourself. Not perfectly, but consistently. And it's consistency that builds up momentum, and that is key. So like I said, we can fall off track, but it's knowing how to get back on. And over time, you'll get those compound wins. And I've had many compound wins over the last few years, that back in my recent phase of 2022, I was doing the podcast, but I was working full-time for a company where I was overseeing a wellbeing program for women who'd experienced domestic abuse, and teaching a lot of these things live on a coaching program to help them make decisions that were healthier and move them in a direction out of the abuse cycle into a life that just felt better. And generally just moving out of that is a big shift. So for them, we had to apply the same theory. What lures them back in? What is it, the mindset? What controls do they need to put in place? And how can they start to fixate on that? Because often people in toxic relationships, and I'm going to do a separate podcast on this specifically. If you're in a toxic relationship, domestic abuse, verbal abuse, psychopathological, narcissist, and I'm talking about heavy traits, that can interfere with your mindset, rob you of so many of the good feeling chemicals, but also send you in twister, spiral thought processes. And releasing yourself from those can be really, really tricky. It's possible. And sometimes you can just release yourself overnight like that and listen to a meditation or mindset work. And that can be enough to empower you forward, power you moving forward. You listen to a talk, something inspires you, and you're able to keep hold of it, keep hold of that inspiration. But the separate conversation I'm going to have about that is about, it can also be deeply ingrained, especially if you did grow up in a war zone or experience trauma as a kid, significant trauma. We talk about adverse childhood experiences, then it can make it harder to do any program like this. But start small. Just set that intention, start that goal, because know it is possible to move out where you are, even if you've never experienced it before. And that's one of the hardest things to do. And I think in a way, that's why my journey was slow, really, in the first 10 years, was because I'd never known anything other than the way that I was, my state of, I'd say, melancholy and anxiety as a kid, and being so shy and not having the social skills or the confidence or the courage at the time that had sort of got in the way. But it didn't ever really, I was always confident at work. My confidence massively grew at work. But it took time and some of those things go in stages. So where next? So you can do my 30-day program. You can turn it into a 30, 60, and 90-day, because I've actually got 3 programs online. And I'm going to be giving away a goal clarity template where you can map out where you are and where you want to be. And that also goes along with with the workshop in 2 parts. So I've made it really simple. You can either do the Kickstarter program with me, which is 1-to-1 sessions, 3 sessions over the period of 1 month, that goes along a 30-day plan, and I help you create that plan. And also the coaching group, where you can meet other people, where we look at where your sticking points are, and you get some personal support and support from other people in the group. Or you can just do the program. So it's totally up to you. If you want to get in contact for the one-to-one support or the group coaching, just email me, melgbb@hotmail.com. No, say it again, melgbb555@hotmail.com. Or you can, so that's email me, or you can follow the link below to the Kickstarter session. So we can have a quick chat, one-off session, or we can do the free session, Kickstarter session, to get you moving forward. So that's for deeper support, but on a very basic level, leave some feedback or send me an email if you're doing this in private and you don't want really anyone else to know and you want to give it a go. Then link with this, but think about your own body chemistry, and you can look up things like epigenetics and DNA and diet, how that supports your energy and your fluctuations in energy throughout the day, because that's also something that I've used. So this is sort of part 2. So if you've had enough of listening so far, that's fine. I just want to give you a few journal prompts if you want to take it a little bit further, just to get you moving forward. So this is how we just move forward on awareness and self-regulation. So these are journal prompts to put in your journal. And when we have our Kickstarter sessions, I'd be interested in noticing what your answers were to these. What am I? So what are you noticing about your thoughts and emotions today? What thoughts and emotions are you having? Where am I reacting instead of responding? That means reacting is like where you get that quick, feel that you want to respond to the text really quickly, or respond to someone, we feel angry or agitated straight away. And what does it feel like when you observe your inner world without trying to change it, where you just observe what's going on? And then affirmation for that is, I recognize my own personal power even when it's uncomfortable. So moving out of our comfort zone can feel uncomfortable, so we shouldn't try and avoid it for that. And then journal prompts, where it helps you dive into motivation, dopamine, purpose, risk, and move out of drama loops. So what part of your power have you been given away, and to whom? And giving away power means if you think about every time you get a text from someone, you're now thinking about that person. So if you are only ever responding to texts, and those texts are dramatic or negative or highlighting an issue, and you're trying to work, and you keep thinking about that person, that your power, your energy is now being transmitted out. Whereas if you pull back and you don't keep responding and reacting really quickly to everything around you, and focusing on the goal in hand and putting some boundaries in place so that that time is precious, then you start to notice where you're kind of giving that away, or where that's being robbed. And then what does true motivation feel like in your body? What do you already effortlessly do that's just easy to do, and why? Where do you feel that in your body? And then what one area of your life are you ready to take responsibility for, do something different about? Not from shame, but from love, something that you want to do that will help you feel better, happier, have more abundance. So the affirmation for this is true freedom comes from living your truth, not shrinking to fit what others expect. So for the closing set of affirmations, this is about reclaiming control, building flow, and stepping into a life that's truly yours. So the journal prompts for this is, where in my life do I already feel free? And where do I feel least free? What does freedom look like to me, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? And what's one small action that I can take this week that aligns with that vision? So below you'll find the links to the talks that go deeper on this subject and the journal prompts, and then the link to me for when you're ready to go deeper, whether that's one-to-one or in a group. And I hope you've enjoyed this session. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and take up the program. Everything in July is being released, and see how you get on with that.